So this is a collaborative project between a few people, and David Rutchless at Texas A&M Galveston, who's sitting right there, Carolyn Fish at University of Oregon, and Craig Dalton at Hofstra, and myself. And it's trying to hang together these two areas of research that we've been sort of circling around for the first few years. And so I'm gonna present these two ideas and then sort of try to fit them together at the end. So we'll start by talking about climate change communication and cartography. Then we'll talk about cartographic representation and ideology in games. And then I'll sort of try to fit them together because I think games offer a specifically hopeful way of thinking through climate change. So David, Carolyn, and I, we wrote this piece, and it was on climate change communication, how cartography is used to communicate climate change to various populations. And the traditional approaches place cartography as this key translational moment. There's this emphasis, if you read a lot of the literature, there's this emphasis on this unidirectional clear communication, right? The goal is, if we get the maps right, we're gonna get people to understand climate change better. And we sort of had some concerns with what's privileged in such approaches, right? Who gets spoken for. And you can see this is a slide from Carolyn where, you know, up on the left, we have, this is a optimum I am having a very long day and not speaking well, please bear with me. An interpolation of seasonal temperatures, and then on the right, we have kind of how that got presented in, I don't know, the New York Times, let's say. And so Carolyn went and she talked with a lot of people, graphics editors, and she did this great research. And these words, translation, and like, we need to translate the science for people, kept coming up over and over again. Like, this is very clear that these, some of these people at least, and maybe some of you are in this room and you're like, no, that's not me. But some of these people at least view themselves as their role is to translate the science into a way that people can understand. And if you get back to that, that has a lot of similarities with our people have probably seen this, the map communication model. And I'm not gonna go into the sort of whole history where Robinson makes a call for this in 1952, and then it shows up in the 60s and it develops through the 60s and 70s. But what I really do want to draw attention to is that this was the dominant form of cartographic research in the United States by the 70s. And I am explicitly not suggesting that, like, out there, these climate change mappers, they're using this unreformed, unreflective version of the map communication model. No, that's not what's happening. But what I am trying to suggest is that there are these very specifically constructed ideas of who the cartographer is and who the audience is and what the intent of the map is, right? And so, that translation, cartography is this tool of translation. Cartography is not the locus of research. It is a thing that we apply to communicate something accurately so that people understand it. And in the 60s and 70s, this was done with a series of sort of cognitive studies where, right, you get your students, you give them maps, you say, hey, interpret this map, and then you make charts of whether, oh, the roads are orange and they understood things 10% better, great, roads should be orange. And in newspapers now, you have, this idea of the idealized reader, right? And this is done through marketing tests and data tracking and on all of these systems that construct who the target for a given story is. And so there's similarities there that I want to draw attention to. And so going black. We sort of come to the conclusion that what we need to do is recognize that acknowledgement is not enough and practice mappings that account for the role of the map reader as a co-constitutive member of our geospatial tools. And in particular, we call for people to explore complementary combinations of new and existing techniques that work with rather than against the grain of the intended narrative. So that's but you can read this paper. I like it. You don't have to. And then, all right, so what about games, right? So that's our one idea, right? We've got this idea of how cartography is being used in climate communication right now. And so how do games fit in? Well, in another project with Craig Dalton and David O'Sullivan, who's at Victoria University of Wellington, and maybe we've given talks at this as NACIS, and maybe you've seen them, but like we argue that there is important baked-in ideology in the games we play. And sometimes it's really obvious. This is an all-American educational game called Victory Over Communism. And I think it's pretty clear what the ideology here is. I'll also point out that what's interesting here is that that map has absolutely nothing to do with the game space. The game space is you just kind of go around the outside and like answer trivia questions about how great the US is. But sometimes in the space does matter. So this is Volko Ruhnke. Apparently my animations aren't working. That's why he's a little faded out. This was supposed to zoom in. Oops. But this is called Labyrinth: The War on Terror, 2001 --. And it's a really good game. It's for 2 players. One side is basically the West and one side is the jihadists, but it's heavily sort of intended that it's Al-Qaeda, given its time that it's come out. The thing about Ruhnke is he makes really, really great games, but he's also a consultant for the CIA. And like that's his background. He makes like war games for them. And so you're like, okay, well, why does that matter? Well, you might have heard of this game called Root. And it's our argument that there's a direct line between Root and Labyrinth. And this isn't subtle. This isn't us like inferring that. Cole Werrell, the designer, he explicitly talks in his designer logs about how Root spatial models were inspired by Ruhnke's work. And so that's the cartographic imaginary, the game space of the play, is really derived from it. And the concept is, if you look here, you can kind of see the whole board. It's like spaces here, and then they get filled with stuff. Sometimes these are called like dudes on a map game, but these aren't like quite that. They're a little different. And they're modeled on CIA flowcharts, right? We can go from, how the CIA is modeling counterinsurgency to us sitting around our living room playing with these furry woodland creatures that fight each other. Okay, why does that matter? Well, if we hang these ideas together, what we get is that cartography is a core means of communicating climate change, right? People seem to think that, and I think it's true, right? And that communication needs to be understood in inclusive, playful, and multi-directional ways. So, here's where games start to come in for us, right? If we accept that the spatial models and representations of games shape the worlds that they depict, and are shaped by them, what's unique about them is they provide interactivity and win conditions. And that matters because, so this slide, I know this is the PDF, so it's not going to animate right. You're just going to get a big mess. But over the last few years, there's been a lot of stories about climate anxiety, climate hopelessness. It's called various things depending which media outlet you're reading it in. But it's the idea that people are sort of just overwhelmed and they don't know what to do. I particularly like this is from the New York Times, they were like, share with a friend. And I was like, yeah, I'll share my climate anxiety. Cool. But how do you deal with that, right? And I think that games, because they are collaborative, because they are interactive, and because they offer win conditions, are an actual way to make people feel agency in their climate. And I think you can see that in terms of how games have changed over time. And these are three games tonight. They're all from very, very well-respected designers. The one on the left is called The Cost. It's a really, really good game. It's about skirting regulations to be able to allow to continue to mine asbestos. And as bad things happen, more and more people die, and you have to put little dead people on the board. And it's a really depressing and dark game. And you win by making the most amount of money. And it's like, well, okay, yeah, I mean that's real. And then in the middle, we have CO2, which was a Vital Lacerda game. He's known for making like really, really complicated, heavy, big board games. And in the first one, it's the first release, it's very, very similar to the cost, right? You are an energy company and you are trying to maximize profit as the climate deteriorates. And he kind of felt bad about it, and people weren't really enjoying it, right? Like the cost doesn't sell well at all. I think it had a print run of like 500 total. And so Lacerda re-released it called Second Chance. And it literally offers a win condition where you can like not fully destroy the environment, but still produce a profit. And that sold much better. And most recently, and about to come out, is the one on the right. That's Daybreak. That's Matt Leacock, who you might know if you've ever played the game Pandemic, which is really, really popular. This is his new game. And it is explicitly about designing sustainable, inclusive, and equitable potential futures in light of like the climate crisis. And so we're seeing this start to emerge where people like, they don't want to play the cost. It's depressing and sad, and it is. They want to play things like Daybreak. And Daybreak gets people actually engaged in talking with each other and, about the topic at hand. Right, so this is what we want to do. And my co-author, Craig Dalton, was worried about that top right image because he was like, it looks like a drug bust. It's plastic pieces that we've ordered, and we have a bunch of them. And that's my daughter staring angrily at, that's the King is Dead, which is a really good game. And then in the lower right, that's My Lil Everdell, which is like Everdell for children. It's really nice. But anyway, I keep turning my thing off. Our next step is actually getting the game into a playable shape. Unlike Heather, who had a really awesome game that is playable, we're still working on that. It's really hard. I'm like really into worker placement, so I'm trying to figure out how to get that mechanic to work in this context, and it's just not quite in my head yet. And then it's partnering with communities to tell their stories, right? Like that's the end goal here, is we want to have this game that helps people tell their stories of how they're thinking through climate hope instead of climate hopelessness. So that's where we are. Thanks. Here's all our names. Feel free to email me and chat about whatever. I have some board games in my bag, so if you ever want to play, I almost always have games on me.
We've got some time for questions. If anyone has any questions.
So I'm curious if you've given much thought to the gap or differences between seeing climate change gameplay in board games versus video games? Because you see things like Civilization, which has climate change features.
Okay, so the question is about how thinking through climate in board games versus video games. Yes, I think about that a lot because I play a lot of video games. For me and this project, the reason we're focusing on board games is because they're tactile and collaborative, and they get people face to face. And I think that for what we're trying to do, that's really important. But I do think there's like some great games out there that tackle this issue for in video games. Like there's the new just came out or is coming out. It's like, the world has collapsed due to climate change. You have to like restore the ecosystem. It's basically Civilization, but instead of trying to win by war and science and flying off into space, you're trying to build wind plants and stuff and restore ecosystems. I forget its name. It's Renature. That's its name. Sorry. Yeah.
Do you know if you want your ideal game to be a collaborative game like Pandemic, where you all lose?
Yeah. I mean, so is this game going to be collaborative? And I think the answer is yeah. And that's actually what's sort of holding me up mentally is a lot of the games that I really like are not collaborative at all. And so I'm like, well, I could do that. And I'm like, well, that kind of doesn't do what we want here. So I think it will be collaborative, or at least semi-collaborative. I often like the idea of having at least someone in a game space that has a slightly different end goal that's not necessarily known or unknown. So like, you know, not like a full-on trader mechanic, but just kind of like a different goal. I think, yeah.
Are you influenced by like the solar punk movement in
Yes. So yeah, and I have the Solarpunk. Like Solarpunk has a game coming out. I have the print and play files. I haven't played it yet, but yes. The answer in short is yes, very much so. I really kind of enjoy that aesthetic a lot too. I know. I guess I wear a lot of plaid, but you know, underneath it, I really like. I'm punk rock, maybe.
Cool, yeah, one more.
One more.
Going back to the sort of the topic of translation, but in a sort of more interactive way, to
Yeah.
what degree do you think games could have potential to actually, let's say, just convince, change minds rather than just sort of clarify the problems that you already recommended?
So that's why we're doing, so the idea is like, can games like actually change minds? So yes, my belief is yes, and but that is something that we would have to study and test, right? And I think that like whether my game ever sees the light of day or not, I'm gonna be really interested to see how people interact with Daybreak once it releases. And I think pre-orders are still up for it if you guys all wanna like run out and buy it and then tell me what you think, but, or.
It's almost like the game has to masquerade as something it isn't at first.
Yes. Yeah, like I think that's where this was a little different because we want this game to be explicit and upfront about like, this is what you're doing. You know, like there's not gonna be like no secret twist where it's like, aha, and actually we were critiquing capitalism all along. It's like, no, we were doing that from the beginning. And so I am hopeful that this will actually change minds, but that's something that like, once we get this, then we're gonna study that, if that makes sense. Yeah, so this is sort of just like trying to show you the agenda of where we all are.
Cool, thank you so much.
Thanks, guys.